Hey everyone, my name is Jeff. I'm a senior client partner based out of Texas. I help customers with seats, licensing, support. So if you don't have any contacts at Unity, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. For today's agenda, we're going to talk about publishing contracts and how to negotiate the best deal for you. So let me introduce our panelists today. We've got Alyssa Colgard, the COO of Acupara Games and founder of publisher Pathfinder. We also have Renee Otto, video game lawyer and founder of Deviant Legal. Again, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A pod in the Zoom at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'm passing on to you, Alyssa.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate everyone joining. A good time of day wherever you are. My name is Alyssa. I'm the CEO of Akbar Games. If you're not familiar with Akbar Games, we are a mid-sized indie publisher based mostly in Los Angeles. We've been around for about 10 years now. And we publish a lot of Unity titles. All of the titles on the screen are Unity titles. And our pillars are very focused on like accessibility and indie for indies. So we really believe in like a rising tide lifts all ships. So wanted to come and talk to people to kind of help you regain some of the power in negotiating with publishing contracts, and give you some good tips so that you're equipped to have just a better position when you're negotiating with publishers. My name is Alyssa. I've been in games for almost 20 years at this point. I've worked in publishing, development, AAA, indie, licensed, and original IPs. Some of the main titles that I've worked with are in here. I'm also the founder of Publisher Pathfinder, as Jeff mentioned, which is a free community resource that can help match you to the best publishers or financiers or funds or grants, whatever you need in order to help bring your game to life, especially with financing. And I've worked on all sides of the publishing arrangement, mostly in like a production or executive role.
Hi everyone, my name is René Otto, and as been mentioned, I'm the founder of Deviant Legal. Deviant Legal is a law firm that exclusively focuses on the games industry. For us, our main goal is to be an industry ally and to make quality legal solution accessible for everyone, regardless of your size, your business, or your background. Because we believe that we see a lot of indie developers needing legal support, but afraid to reach out to lawyers because in the end, we are perceived as formal, elitist, dusty, and way too expensive. And we try to break that mold, not only because we believe it's better for you, but also because we are lawyers ourselves who love to do legal, but just dislike the traditional legal culture. Myself, I'm René Otto. I've been a lawyer for around 11 years now. Started out in traditional legal and then quickly focused on the video game industry. For me, that was a personal passion because I wanted that I could develop games, but I'm just unable to. But I always wanted to give back to the industry, which, well, plays a big role in my life because not only do I love games, but also I met my own partner 15 years ago through World of Warcraft. So as you can might imagine, our family is very game focused. So currently I work with over 250 developers and publishers, helping them with everything legal. So negotiating contracts, making sure that there's compliance, but everything you come across as a game studio, we do. But because of our love of the industry, we also try to be part of the industry. So I always say we're not a law firm doing games. No, we're actually a game studio doing legal. So from that capacity, I'm also involved with Breda Game City, the Dutch Esports Association. I'm an ambassador at Women in Games, and I'm also a mentor in various capacities so that I try to be and remain fully rooted in our sector.
Well, and I appreciate Renee joining because I'm not equipped to answer legal and contract terms from a lawyer perspective, but he totally is, so we can get you from both sides, publishing and legal today. Uh, as far as what we'll be talking about, so publishing red flags, we just want to make sure that you understand what a bad and a good relationship looks like so that when you are having these conversations and negotiations, you can tell one from the other. Even people who are really experienced in games don't always know the signs of a bad partnership, and publishers don't always present bad contract terms, even out of maliciousness or out of attempting to be exploitative, although that definitely does happen sometimes. Sometimes publishers can just be ignorant or inexperienced or just unskilled, to be honest with you. So it's not always intentional, but regardless, you should know what the signs are so that you can protect yourselves against them. Because a lot of developers see publishing and publishing deals as very necessary, whether they need it for funding or marketing or services support or access to platforms, or even just like the perception that a publisher is what you do if you are a legitimate game developer. But some publishing deals are actually worse than if you self-publish and it just transfers all the risk onto you and they take just maximum rev share in exchange for very little value that they're providing in return. We've been in business for 10 years, like I said, and we've seen all sorts of developers in very bad deals, unfortunately, that are very hard to escape after you have signed the contract. So it's important that you know what these bad terms are before you sign any contract. Um, and not everyone even needs a publisher, to be clear. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So decide even if it's at the right path for you to begin with.
And Alyssa, just to sorry to interrupt here, but like in our poll there, I'll just share the results really quickly. Um, what people have answered today, actually, I was really surprised, is a lot of people are self-publishing by choice. So I think today, I think maybe you can reassure them that some publishers are good out there
Totally
today.
valid.
But yeah, like I was surprised about that number. But yes, thank you. I just wanted to share those results. You can keep
Yeah,
going.
and hearing this, I'm also very curious, but I don't want to delay our own talk. But if you want to share in chat, I'm very curious as to why you self-publish by choice and are still a little bit curious about publishing contracts. Is that you is there a specific reason for it or any background? Because I think that's very interesting to explore.
Yep.
Also, only one of you loves your publisher. That's, yeah, I'm sad to see
That
that.
was surprised me as well. Someone loves their publisher. Joking.
Cool. So these are some of the terms that we'll be talking about in more detail. The contracts define kind of the power structure between your relationship, and it's not always like an obvious gotcha. Some are just subtle clauses that compound over time, or exploitive contract terms can be buried under like a lot of legalese that's really hard to understand if you're not a lawyer, or it can be just missed because you didn't do proper due diligence or review, you didn't have somebody who could advocate for you on the legal side. And some clauses really depend on the specifics of how they are written, which Renee will talk about in more detail. But you do need to consider your contract holistically about what the needs are for your project and you as a developer specifically, as well as what services and financing the publisher is providing. That will inform the specific terms of your contract deal. So, not every contract is going to be one-to-one the same. There's no perfect, beautiful contract. It's very dependent on your needs and your project. But you should always, 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 always review the terms with an entertainment lawyer, and feel free to redline or negotiate as you see fit. We do on every single contract. It is totally expected. If there are things that don't work for you or make you uncomfortable, you are welcome to negotiate those terms. So one of the most challenging things that you will sometimes see in contract is 100% upfront recoupment. So if a publisher provides direct funding to you in order for you to develop your game to launch, you should still be able to see some amount of money on day one. If a publisher is collecting all of the funds, all of the revenue from sales on day one and trying to recoup all of their investment out of the gate, that means you're going to have a gap in funding yourself in some capacity. Some games can take years to recoup or never recoup at all. It's never for certain. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're not making money from the game that you have launched. There are better scenarios. Sometimes the publishing contract will favor the publisher until recoup and then swap in favor of the developer post recoup. Sometimes it will be different per platform. There's a lot of different ways around this, but you should always make sure that you are getting paid from day one so that you don't have a gap in funding. You're muted, Renee.
What I see from this perspective as well is that many developers find it hard to negotiate this. But what I always do as a lawyer is to uncover the why, because you can say like, hey, we have a full recoup or we haven't, but you should actually deep dive into the why you want to have a change. So for example, a publisher quite often wants you to do your post-contractual or post-release obligations. So they expect you to do bug fixing, to perhaps do DLC, to do some other updates. And what I always say to a publisher is like, yeah, we can actually only do that in case there is some sort of a revenue stream. So I believe that developers should be paid from day one. If a publisher does not want to do that, at least find an alternative, like, for example, an extra milestone so that you can at least cover your costs. But if you sell it to the publisher that you actually say like, well, sorry, but you want me to do bug fixing, but I can't do it without any revenue, then you can at least counter it. And in these negotiations, I always say you also discover the culture of a publisher pretty easily, because you iron out all assumptions. And if you find out during these conversations that there is little room for you to cover your burn rate for bug fixing, that's also a sign, but that is one of the non-contractual that we will deep dive in later. But always try to have something and make the calculation and check whether you are allowed to at least cover your cost. And also something I see a lot with developers as well is that they feel that the publisher fully invests everything in the development of the game, but you should also make a calculation what your sweat equity in the title already has been. Because if you've been developing for 1 year and survived for 1 year, then sometimes if you make the calculation, then you actually both invested around 50-50, which combined with a you don't get paid from day one is a very strange partnership, so to say.
Yeah, and just as a frame of reference, most of our titles take 2 to 3 years to recoup on average, and that is from a mix of both unit sales as well as biz dev deals. And to be clear, you should be sharing risk with the publisher, including financial risk. You should not be taking all the risk on yourself. One of the other things that you will see from the financial perspective is if your recoup actually exceeds the investment that the publisher has put in. So that this can be through things like administrative or management fees or percentage increases. I can say with certainty that there are some well-known funds and grants that even have these terms where they recoup twice, which is insane. Don't do that. And this varies widely from publisher to publisher, what actually plays into the recoup and what does not. So also make sure that you understand what is recouping, if it's their internal costs, administrative costs, or just the direct development funding. For us in particular, most of our internal services, we don't play into the recoup. It's just the development costs that we put in, but some publishers will recoup QA, they'll recoup localization, they'll recoup events, all sorts of additional spend. They'll recoup their marketing spend. So they're recouping both the financial cost as well as their services they're putting into it. So make sure you understand what does and doesn't play into your recoup, and at least put caps on some of the things, ceilings of what would recoup.
Yeah, and even if you have discussions with a publisher that is hesitant to agree to caps, you can always have like a structure where you say like we use this cap, and if you want to spend more because you believe it's good for the game, then we discuss it and we can do it by mutual agreement. Also, to like sometimes this recoup structure where they recoup more than their initial investment is a little bit hidden. So one of the tips I always give as well is that you at least identify from which revenue the recoupment takes place. Because I've seen a contract where there was like an immediate revenue from day one. So they passed the first red flag, but you got 10% of revenue until recoup. And when was there a situation of a recoup? That was when that 10% equaled the investment. But if you then recoup from the developer's share of the revenue, that meant in that specific case that a recoup would only happen when a publisher already got 700% profit, which makes it for a very skewed relationship. So always check that recoup happens from full revenue from day one, because otherwise it could be a hidden multiplier.
One other thing to be careful for is transferring the rights to your IP. So, regardless of whether you sign a publishing deal, you should maintain the rights to your own creative product. Uh, they should not require transfer of IP ownership. Some caveats, maybe if it's somebody like Disney and you get some sort of crazy reward for actually giving up your IP, but most of the time that's not the case. You want to retain rights so that you can actually have the ability to negotiate and do other things with your game long term. So you could permanently lose control of your work if you sign a contract with these terms. So there's all sorts of language that can mean this, anything like assigns all right, title, and interest, or in perpetuity. You don't ever want to sign contract terms that don't have an end on them, or any format now known or later developed. These are very open-ended, and it locks you into a lot of potential spots that you don't want to be in with your specific IP. And it should only be specific to the game you are currently working on in its current format. It shouldn't extend to a bunch of unrelated assets.
Yeah, and in addition to this, there are also two other things that you should look out for. The first one is what we call a transfer on breach. So sometimes the IP is retained by you, but as soon as you breach the contract, the IP is transferred to the publisher. Normally, the reason behind that is like, yeah, but if a developer doesn't complete the game, at least we can complete it and then recoup our investment. But especially when you have a very tight milestone schedule, that could lead to a situation of you quickly losing your IP. The other thing that is very important to take into account is the IP rights of ports and marketing materials. So one of the main principles of IP laws, and then mainly copyright law, is that copyright is assigned to someone who creates something. So if someone else creates a port, in principle, the IP rights of that port is theirs. So it's also very important that as soon as you part ways with your publisher, you get the IP, or preferably even earlier, so that you immediately get the IP of that port and that it is licensed back to you, so that you can the publisher can still use it for publishing purposes. Because otherwise you have scattered IP. Perhaps you could not use the marketing materials, or they take the ports offline because you don't have the rights to it, or you can't update it. So also from that perspective, don't only watch out for the transfer of things you own, but also for the aspects someone else owns and you need when going forward.
In addition to giving up rights to your current IP, there are sometimes terms that option future IP. So in addition to the current game that you are signing, there may be contracts that try and lock in future games, even unrelated games, games that aren't sequels, that try and lock in all of your future works, which makes it really challenging if you have a bad relationship with the publisher or your next game is not a good fit for the publisher for whatever reason. Having a right of first refusal or needing to go to them first before you explore other partnerships, it really limits your negotiations. This should be, you can maybe consider a right of first refusal for direct sequels because it's just easier to live with the same publisher if you're working within the same franchise. But even then, there shouldn't be any requirement for you to sign with them again.
Yeah, and from this perspective, one tip I always give is that I see that the games industry use the terms like a right of first negotiation, right of first refusal, right of last refusal, all those kind of terms. They use it for different concepts. So it sounds like an open door, but always read thoroughly what is meant with it. And if a contract plainly states like a right of first option, always make sure that the procedure is described. So from my perspective, I believe that a right of first negotiation is a right where you can at least discuss a future partnership for around 30 days, for example. And if you don't come to an agreement, you're free to go. I believe that's still manageable because in the end, also a publisher, if a publisher does its work well, they also invested in the IP, so it's nice that they can at least talk with you first. But if you look, for example, at the right of first refusal, which is often a right where they can determine that they publish your game on terms that are already in the contract, I would advise against that because, especially if it's the first game in a series, you don't really know the commercial potential of it. Of course, you have an assumption based on data, but you don't know how it performed exactly, which means that you might accept less favorable terms. While if you find out that the game did awesome, a publisher perhaps wants to publish the game on the same terms as part one, which are less favorable to you. Well, if it did bad, they will just not exercise that option, right? So that's something to take into account. And then you have the last refusal. The last refusal is actually a publisher that states, hey, you can just go and negotiate with others. But as soon as you get a specific offer, you come to me and I get the right to match it. That sounds more fair at first, but at the same time, if you don't have a great feeling with your current publisher anymore, it can still be that you stuck with them. So one of the tips I always give is to make sure that every and all terms you agree with a new publisher, including commitments, are written down perfectly in the contract, which makes it harder for your current publisher to match it. So that you at least can check if they're going to match it. Are they going to do whatever the second publisher is promising me? Last one as well is exclusivity, which is also sometimes an indirect optioning of future IP. And for exclusivity, sometimes it makes sense. Like if you can't release a similar game within 1 year of the release of your first game, it makes sense to the extent that you don't want to cannibalize sales of your current title. But I always say there should be no prohibition to at least develop a sequel and not announce it or not release it. So from that perspective, be very cautious about that one, because I've seen some contracts where it was like a 10-year contract and you had 10-year exclusivity, which might lock you out of a genre indefinitely.
This is one of the ones that I have found hurts developers more than any of these others. This happens quite often, unfortunately, and there's several developers who are currently stuck in contracts that they can't escape because they either don't have an expiration date or there's no exit clause for cause or breach of contract, which is really unfortunate because then they get stuck indefinitely in limbo with unable to finish their game, unable to release their game, and they've put a bunch of time and effort into a game that is now just stuck with a publisher who is not supporting it for whatever reason. So make sure you watch for specific thresholds and give yourself some sort of exit opportunity, either a mutual decision that allows you both to part ways if you both agree on it, or termination for non-performance or for breach of contract. Make sure there is some way for you to get out of a contract even after you've signed the contract, and ideally a couple ways, because otherwise you can be left with your game being unsupported. There's lots of publishers who are going under, there's publishers who are losing funding. Obviously, the nature of the industry continues to change, and financing is really kind of uncertain right now. So just make sure you don't lock yourself into a relationship that you can't escape from if you need to.
Yeah, from this perspective, also watch out to for the perpetual license that Alyssa already mentioned, because a perpetual license can also mean that even if the contract is terminated, the license still survives the termination of the contract. So then you're still actually stuck with your publisher. Another thing to watch out for is the termination for convenience from the side of a publisher, because sometimes you see that the publisher can just kill the contract without any consequence, and at least make sure that you then you don't need to repay the development funding, but also that you get some sort of a kill fee so that you can survive the quest for finding a new publisher. But perhaps my biggest, I would say, most important thing here is also to include a consequence of termination clause. So what is going to happen when you settle the relationship? One of the most important things, I believe, is a clause which states that the game IDs of the different store pages will be transferred to you. That sounded like one of the most open doors for me, because if you settle the relationship, you give everything back in a nice way, right? But 10 years ago, I had a situation with a publisher who was not that happy that the relationship was settled. And they said, like, yeah, all wish lists were, well, mine effort. So I'm just going to take the store page offline because nowhere is stated that I need to transfer it to you. And of course, you could potentially have a legal discussion in some jurisdictions about abuse of power or an unlawful act, but it's way better if it's phrased in the contract that you are actually obliged to give the marketing material, give the Porsche, give your trademarks back or your store page, because otherwise you could have a discussion about it.
Another one to obviously be careful for is if there's any payment terms that are unfairly weighted towards the publisher or exploitative to the developer. So most of the time, the publisher will control the cash flow. So payments and royalties will go to the publisher, and then they have to pay you out your revenue share from that. But there can be ways that this can be very unfairly weighted towards you. So make sure that payments are on a set schedule, that they're not delayed, that there are possibly fees for delay if they're keeping you from getting paid on time. So they should pay interest. There should not be any vague accounting periods. You should have clear fixed payment schedule and automatic payment obligations. You should not have to chase your publisher for money that is owed to you, and you should know all the time how much money is owed to you. I mean, caveat that sometimes there's a delay in actually getting those reporting or getting the funds from the platforms, so within reason, but you should at least be getting paid on a quarterly basis, and you should know what money is coming to you so that you can plan your life accordingly, right? You should not go into a contract where you are not able to live your life or pay your bills because someone else controls money that is owed to you.
Yeah, and from this perspective, this applies both during the development phase where you get milestone-based funding as well as post-release, but especially in the situation that you get milestone-based funding. So if you get into a contract with a publisher and you get 1 million development funding, you don't get that 1 million outright. You quite often get certain development achievements called milestones, and as soon as you achieve those, you unlock the next installment of the funding. Mostly you deliver a milestone to your publisher and then they get a certain term to assess a milestone. And I always say that it's very important to have specific criteria with regards to those milestones. So when can you reject, but when can you accept? And another thing is a lot of contracts state like if a publisher doesn't respond on time, then it is deemed to be rejected, which is potentially exploitative because a rejection has consequences in a contract. So from that perspective, I always say make sure that if a publisher does not respond on time, you at least are entitled to your payment. And of course, they can then still provide feedback to the milestone, but that's something you will take into account for the next milestone, and not that a publisher does not respond and you don't get your money and you need to let go of your team, because I've seen that happen in practice where a publisher just goes missing in action, does not respond, and you wait and wait and wait, because then you get in a cycle of breaches, because without funding, you can also not deliver the next milestone.
Sure. For us, we have a 1 week milestone review window and no more than that. Related to the payment terms is reporting visibility, because without visibility into the payments that are owed to you, you have no idea how to vet the truth of the payments that are coming to you. So not having statements, not having visibility into how your game is performing, not having transparency audit access means you cannot verify the sales and the money that is owed, and it can make misreporting very possible. So like I said, most of the time we are controlling the finances and the store pages that are coming in. That's part of our services as a publisher, is that you don't have to worry about money. But we always share reporting and financial visibility back to the developer. That is something that all of the platforms support. So there should not be any reason that the publisher is unwilling to give you that level of direct visibility into your own money, in addition to actually having just a clean spreadsheet or report that shows you the finances that are coming. So if they're unwilling to let you look at the data and look at the numbers, that's usually a pretty big red flag, and can mean that they're doing something else nefarious in there. So you should always have the capacity to audit and ask questions if you want. Like I said, sometimes it may take time for the publisher to actually get that data themselves. So, a little bit of patience, but definitely they should never outright refuse that to you.
Yeah, and it can be that there is no audit clause in the first version. Then kindly ask for one. If it's then not still in there or they refuse, just run. This is like a publisher who does not want to have an audit clause is the biggest red flag there is, because actually you say that you don't want to provide transparency. If you look at these clauses, the costs of an audit are mostly for your own risk and account, but mostly you should agree that if an underpayment of between 5 or 10% is discovered, that a publisher covers the cost of, the audit for you. So there are some standards there, but if you have questions, happy to, you can reach out to me and I'll answer them to keep the pacing of this talk.
Would this be a good time to take a few questions? Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think just going through, Alyssa, do you mind just scrolling back to the red, like the original page where you had the list of these red flags? Yeah, exactly, so that we know what we're talking about. And Jeff, do you want to? Yeah, I think we had a few questions in the Zoom feature here.
Yeah. So the first question is about the recoup time. You mentioned that normally your projects take a couple of years. So the question came in if the estimated recoup time is regardless of the project size.
Yeah, that is average for us. And again, we're like a mid-sized publisher, so there is a wide range. They can definitely be like a home run smash hit and recoup very, very quickly. Some games we put zero investment in, and our only investment is on the service side, so they don't need to recoup at all. It varies widely. Some investment is very small, some investment is very large, which obviously the more money and services and time you put into the game, the longer and harder it is to recoup, the kind of higher the floor but also the potential ceiling is on those games. So there's no golden bullet answer for that one. It depends a lot on the project, the publisher, the financing, and the marketability.
Diane, did you wanna unmute yourself?
Yeah. I'm just wondering what is the best way to find publishers that are a good match for the types of games that you're doing?
Well, I'll self-promo on that one, I guess. The past publisher Pathfinder site that I built, that's specifically what that's for. So I hand curated over 800 different publishers, investors, and financiers as part of that. It's a huge database. You can input all of your data, including how much funding you're looking for, what platforms you're looking to come for, your genres, even your like ethics and values, so that you can find partners who are a good fit for you. It's like a little point and click adventure, so it's also fun and cute to go through. Um, you're also welcome to reach out to me directly and show me your materials, and I can point you in the direction of some people. Finding a publisher is not the most fun part of the experience. People would rather be working on their games than looking for financing. Everybody hates it. But we're trying to make it easier to find people who are a good match for you. And it's more than just the contract terms, right? It has to be like genre fit, portfolio fit. They have to be a partnership fit. They have to kind of share your work ethic and your values. So that's the easiest way I know how. But I definitely spent a lot of time curating that and keeping it up to date. But you can also meet people at events if you want to get like a sniff test in the beginning. I think it's very important to meet the publishers directly, whether it's in a call or in person, to see if you would like working with them. You should consider it very much like a relationship or an interview, right? So, oh, and don't sign a contract without actually talking to someone as well.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Antoine had a question. Are devs retaining IP normally the standard for mobile games as well?
Yeah, the standard is throughout. So also for VR, for mobile, for PC, and for console, the standard is that you retain your IP. The only situation where I might see that differently is that if a publisher also does code development together with the developer, then it can be shared IP sometimes. That's a whole different topic, also has its pitfalls. But normally, if a publisher is acting as a publisher, you retain your IP. So all those horror stories from the past, like a publisher will always take your IP, that's not really true. They can still exercise influence through the clauses we've discussed, so the right of first negotiation and last refusal and everything. But the standard is that you should retain your IP.
All right. Got another question here. This one is about the sales thresholds and asked, you mentioned no sales thresholds. How do those work usually?
Yeah, I could give how they work for us, and Renee may have a little bit better insight into this one. But for us, we have sometimes contract terms that trigger if we hit specific sales thresholds. So sometimes we won't commit to like specific platforms or services until we vet that the project will perform well. So some contracts will be, this is a PC launch. If you hit this specific sales threshold, then we are committing to bringing you to Xbox. But we had a few contracts where we committed to things upfront too early, and then the game didn't perform, and then both the developer and the publisher were locked into contractual commitments that actually negatively impacted the game.
Yeah, and in addition to that, sometimes you also see that there is a termination right when quarterly sales, for example, for 1 or 2 quarters drop below a certain threshold. But you mostly see that with more games as a service kind of contracts where like revenue is expected to continuously pour in instead of premium games where you, of course, have like a spike after the 1.0 release and then it slowly decreases over time. Then those clauses are a bit less often included, but still can be included if there's a very low threshold where you say like, well, if the revenue stream is lower than that, there's no need to sit out the term of the partnership.
Thank you, Renee, and great questions so far.
Well, we'll move a little bit quicker through this section. But in addition to just the pure contract terms, red flags, there are often partnership red flags that people don't always consider for whatever reason. They're just so desperate for financing, or they just have, rose-colored glasses on, whatever the case may be. But the relationship red flags are usually a good indicator of bad terms and bad partnerships to come. So you can often spot when somebody is not going to be a good fit for you when you are in the negotiation phase. So the relationship matters just as much, if not more, than the contract because this informs what your actual partnership is going to be like. And when you sign with the publisher, you are committed to them for 5, 7 years on average. They're going to be well, most publishers will be very integrated in the process, and you want to make sure that they're actually the type of person that you want to be in a business relationship with. So this, you should ask questions that help you determine if they're a good fit for you, kind of across the board. Do their services fit for your needs? Does their working methodology align with your own? Do they share kind of pillars and vision and goals and values with you? Because you're going to be stuck with them, like legally. So one of the things that we see most often, and this happens all the way up to AAA, is creative control and vision. If a publisher is signing your project, obviously they should be providing you feedback and play testing and quality assurance and giving you advice on how to make the most marketable and successful version of your game. They should give you analysis and strategy, but they should be signing your game because they believe in your vision as the creative developer and your ability to execute on it. So they should not have veto power to steamroll your own creative direction and what you want to the game to the point that your game is no longer even your vision. You should retain the ability to make your own decisions about the game that you are making. This happens quite often where it becomes something that is not even what the developer originally intended it to be because of too much pressure from the publisher on the creative vision side of things.
Yeah, and this is also something that you need to look at from a contractual perspective. For example, when you look at the milestone schedule, make sure that it's sufficiently detailed so that a publisher cannot randomly decline a milestone just because they don't like it, because otherwise they also influx your creative freedom. But also, I see a lot of clauses where a publisher can at least provide proposals for adjustment and make sure that you are not obliged to do that. Sometimes you see those clauses where you can say like, hey, then you will make an impact analysis and you will negotiate and check if you can come to the same page. That's still okay, but they shouldn't be able to force you because I've also, like last week, seen a contract where a publisher simply said like, or you do it or I do it, and then I recoup those costs. That's something that you really do not want. That deal also didn't continue because it was pretty exploitative, but it is something to take into account when you negotiate a contract.
We've touched on this briefly a couple times already, but if you do not share kind of values and goals and ethics, this often bubbles up in a lot of different ways. So there's all sorts of things that I mean by this. How do you feel about AI? This is something that pops up very often where somebody, as a developer, is very staunchly against generative AI, and then it turns out the publisher is using it, or vice versa, and then there becomes a big rift publicly, usually. How do they feel about marginalized group? Do they share the same kind of values and goals as you? If you do not share goals or agree about where you're going and what's important to you, then you'll make a lot of very opposite business decisions about how you operate. So this is something that I think people should put more emphasis onto than they do, and they should do more exploration to actually ensure that you know what's important to them as a publisher and that it aligns, at least for the most part, with what's important to you as a developer. So you don't want to have values clashing. You can have very like bad public relationships or private relationships in these kind of situations. You can erode your audience trust if you have built kind of an audience that has expectations about how you operate as a developer, and then you sign with a publisher who is in contrast to the audience expectations that you have built. This can also be very bad for you. Another one is quality and distribution of services. So this does happen on like the contract side of things as well, but make sure that all different publishers offer different services. Some are full service publishers. They offer like everything within publishing. Some are very specific and targeted. They only offer marketing. They don't offer any investment or financing. So know what your needs are. What do you actually need out of a publisher that you either can't or don't want to do yourself, and do their services actually match your needs? And is the work fairly weighted between the two of you? Are they actually putting in the effort and kind of are they doing the work that they claim to do, or are they taking a big cut of revenue and not really providing value in return for that? So make sure that they are either very specific genre experts, because publishers have less downside if a single project fails. They're launching multiple games per year. They're not as reliant on the success of a single title in the same way a developer is, who is putting 3-5 years of their life into a single game. So make sure that there is actually alignment in they want the game to succeed as much as you need the game to succeed.
Yeah, from a contractual perspective, know that there are actually 3 levels of marketing obligations. The first one is best efforts. So you just do a legal pinky promise that you will do your best. I always say that's the bare minimum. The second one is a specific marketing budget. And for a specific marketing budget, while I like it, it's also very important to determine which costs can be deducted from that budget. So not that you have a situation where you have Pete, and Pete has a gross monthly salary of 5K a month, and Pete works on the game. So the salary cost internally get recouped from that budget. And the last one is a specific marketing plan. What I often see is that parties in the heat of the negotiation do not really want to flesh out a marketing plan yet, or they find it difficult to do because it's very early in development still. But in those cases, I would at least advise on setting a deadline to create a marketing plan, or at least a commitment that within a certain time period before release, when it still matters, a marketing plan is agreed upon. Because otherwise, if you have very fuzzy and vague marketing commitments, it's very hard to keep a publisher accountable as well. Recently, I also had a game dev who had a commitment like, we will spend up to 50K in marketing. And in the end, that publisher literally spent 0 on marketing because it was a VR game. And after, everything that happened in the VR space, they just determined that they did not want to be active in VR anymore, and at least don't spend any money there anymore. So in the end, that developer remained empty-handed.
So I have a question on this, because I've had multiple studios firsthand tell me that they've had publishing deals with a marketing budget, like a specific number attached, and then there's no way to enforce it. Like the publisher said, I'm going to spend $500,000 on marketing this game, and then it doesn't happen. What would you recommend in situations like that? Like what does the studio, like what can the studio do?
Yeah, that's the hard part, because even like if you have the contract, not all the developers have the means to enforce actually a contract. But the most important thing is that you can at least send like a notice of breach to a publisher telling them that they don't keep up their end of the deal and potentially terminate the contract through it, which is of course also a lot of hassle to do it. But at least normally, if you have something in a contract, you can enforce it. The question is, of course, whether you want it and whether you believe it's good for the relationship. But technically you can, and at least in the worst case, you can at least pull out of the relationship, which opens you up to do something else with the game and start self-publishing it again, for example.
Thank you.
We only have a few more slides. We're probably going to go just over time, but not by much. Another one to watch out for is if publishers overpromise and underdeliver. Anyone can say anything in a meeting. Anyone can claim to do or achieve anything if they're making big, wild promises that they actually can't execute on, or there's no way of knowing with certainty that they can deliver on what their promises on. Look out for that as a red flag. Also, make sure that they are not resistant to adding specific language in the contract about what they are agreeing to do on the support side. And in addition to talking to legal counsel, make sure that you also talk to other developers and people who have worked with the publisher. The publisher should not discourage you from talking to their previous partners unless those partners have bad things to say about them and their working relationship. So do your diligence, not just on the contract side, but also talk to other people and make sure that the publisher actually does what the publisher says they do. On the portfolio neglect side of things, you should also look at what support they are giving games that are currently in their catalog and portfolio. Are they actually marketing the game? Are they seeing success with the game? Are games performing well? What are the store pages like? What are the assets like? Are they involved in events? If there are things that you specifically want a publisher to be doing, you can verify that pretty quickly with some internet searches to make sure that they're actually doing that for games already in their portfolio. So if they are signing a ton of games but actively supporting a few, there are a handful of publishers out there, which maybe this works for some people. It would not be the choice I would make as a developer, who launch or sign 20, 40 games in a year, and I can't imagine that they can give any amount of real support to the games when they're shotgunning them into the world like that. But sometimes if it's just like you're looking for financing and minimal support, maybe that makes sense for you. But like I said, they don't rely on income from a single game in the same way as you. So make sure that they're actually going to do right by your project and the needs. Are they putting effort into the titles they have signed? Is their support lasting after they launch a game, or do they just launch a game and then let the game go into disarray? We support titles long after we launch them. A lot of the income comes from long tail support, so make sure that they are also providing some sort of support post-launch. Another one, which seems obvious, but sometimes people ignore it, is if they are adversarial or combative in the negotiation phase, that is going to continue through the whole relationship. If they are a jerk, they will continue to be a jerk. Just let them, if they tell you that they're a jerk, just believe them. That's not going to go away after you sign a contract. It's just going to get worse. So if they are not collaborative, if they don't seem open to compromise and differing opinions, if they don't seem like they'll be open to actually like disagreements and settle that as adults, don't get into a relationship with them same as you wouldn't like a romantic partner, right? You want to make sure that you actually like working with the people that you'll be working with and that they respect you.
Yeah, and
Don't,
also
yeah, pressure tactics.
Yeah, and also from that perspective, I also hear the myths a lot that developers say like, well, the publisher said that the deal is not negotiable. That's a very common myth, but in practice, it's mostly not true. A lot of publishers who say that I still have some negotiated contracts in my database, so it still happens. But I also believe this is a very culturally important thing, because I always say like a contract is not only for the contract language, but also to iron out assumptions. And if a publisher does not allow you to iron out those assumptions, and becomes hostile is not really the right partner for you. If you, as a person, still believe it's difficult to raise stuff because you don't want to be a burden, that's actually another reason to engage a lawyer to do this, because then you can focus on the relational aspect of a deal, while a lawyer can raise the more difficult stuff. And if there will be a bad response from a publisher, and you still want to maintain the relationship, you can still throw your lawyer under the bus. That's all included. But still, you should always assess the consequences of a relationship, because most of the times when I needed to go to court for like a publishing deal dispute, the signs were already there from the start. Mostly it was like, yeah, I already didn't have an amazing feeling. Mostly sometimes they are pressured because, well, you are forced to go into a deal because otherwise you go bankrupt. I've seen it once or twice, but most of the time you see them at the end of the road that it leads to disputes.
And last one, if they encourage speed over diligence, if they are trying to make you sign quickly without giving you proper time to review and negotiate other deals, because you want to make sure that you get the best deal possible for you. You don't have to take the first deal offered to you, although you may lose an opportunity if you wait too long, but they should not be encouraging you to sign before you've had the chance to do proper due diligence and redlining. Some caveats to this is maybe if there's a time limited opportunity they're trying to sign you quickly for, but even still, there's always going to be other opportunities. That's the whole point of signing with a publisher, is that they know and find these opportunities for your game. So don't feel pressured to sign quickly or skip process steps.
Yeah, and even from this perspective, I also work with a few publishers who believe it's a red flag when you too quickly agree to a contract, because of two reasons. One, they want you to take the partnership seriously. Two, if you sign very quickly, they also have the assumption that you deal with your contracts with that always in the same way, which, for example, could be a problem for IP ownership and everything. So I've even worked with a publisher who put in little Easter eggs in the contract to make sure that you've read it. So, for example, you have the force majeure clause, which means that if something happens, like an actor god or a flood or a power outage, that if you can't comply with the contract, that's not a breach. And they even put in a little Easter egg, because they made a lot of zombie games, that a zombie apocalypse would also constitute a force majeure situation. And when a developer just blindly returned that contract and state like, yeah, all good, then that publisher asked like, well, was there something special about the contract? And they were like, no, all standard. Then they even got sent back to have their contract being reviewed by a lawyer or a professional, or at least redlined by you. And I also know a few publishers who even offer budget to a developer to review a contract because they want you to take the situation seriously. That's then a recoupable budget, but still it's granted.
Here are some additional resources to help you just educate yourself more after this. And just as an outro, the whole goal with the publisher is to help reduce risk and set you for success. Bad publishers will transfer risk entirely onto you. So make sure that you have shared incentives and alignment and transparency throughout the whole process. You do not want a contract that shifts control or risk or downside onto you as the developer, and you should make sure that you trust your instincts, get legal review, talk to other developers, and you're not just signing a contract, but you're choosing your partner for many, many years. So if you want to be informed about your deals, make sure that this happens before the contract. You should make sure that you feel comfortable before you sign ink on paper, because at that point it's very difficult to walk things back. So this conversation should start in the proposal and negotiation stage. You should not be finding things out post contract signing. I think Alan's going to drop some of these in the channel. There's also Renee has a bunch of additional work that he also has put together so that you can read more about these things that we talked about. Raw Fury has made a lot of their contract terms available publicly. In general, people are trying to make this less opaque so that people have more negotiating power. And
Thanks,
then if you want,
Alyssa.
oh yeah, go
Oh no,
ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna jump in and say like I'm gonna send an email with all of these links. I can
Okay,
also drop it in the chat. It might just be harder for people to read, but yes, I'll drop
beautiful.
it.
And then if you want to reach out to Renee or myself after this for any additional questions, our contact info is here, and I think Ellen will also send these links out as well.
It looks like I can't copy paste that much into the Zoom chat actually. So, yeah, just look up for a follow-up email. It's going to have all of those resources. Thank you, Alyssa, for curating that. I do have a quick poll again, just because I'd love to understand how people feel about today's session. So if you want to just take the time to answer this really quickly for us, it'd be really helpful. And just so you know, like, so I think Alyssa, Renee, you're okay with staying on for a few more minutes to answer some questions? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. So we're going to still answer a few questions. But one thing I just wanted to note is that there will be a survey that you'll receive after you close this webinar. So we'd love to have your thoughts on how the session went. Do you want more of this? Do you want to learn more about a specific topic? Please let us know. There's also going to be like in the form, there's like a place for you to drop your email if you'd like to learn more about what Akupara is doing, what they're offering in terms of their publishing services, and also what Deviant Legal, Renee's team's doing to offer legal services. So just drop your email. And just so you know, the survey is anonymous. So I've had people answer the survey, not leave, they'd say yes, but not leave their email, and then we can't contact them. So it is an anonymous survey. So please leave your email if you actually want us to contact you. Okay, thank you. So just looking at this poll here, it looks like most people are still here. But it looks like, yeah, like almost half of you feel like you feel confident negotiating or at least pushing back when you see the red flags that we've talked about today. Alyssa, Renee, do you have any comments on this?
Well, I'm at least happy that it's informative. Of course, I also see that people still feel unsure. Now, I don't know whether they mean that they feel unsure about should I go for a publisher or not, or being unsure about the contracts. In case of the latter, we're still here. So happy to answer any questions you still have, because of course, this has been a bird's eye view.
Yeah, and to be clear, if you're unsure about contract terms, that is what lawyers are for. Make sure that you use a legal counsel. It's complicated.
Thank you. So let's jump into some questions. I don't know if Jeff, do you have one that you want to ask?
Yeah, there's one here I thought that is pretty interesting. They said they were talking to a publisher and that they were told that they're planning to contract out the marketing work to another publisher because they don't have much experience with that aspect of publishing. They like that they know their weakness and have a plan to mitigate them, but I'm wondering if you've seen red flags relating to this kind of setup.
I can talk about that one. So I'm curious why marketing is the thing that they want to subcontract, because from my perspective, that's like the main service that a publisher should provide, and I'm curious what value they're providing if not marketing. I assume it's like distribution or something like that. But um, not all publishers have all in-house services. We do subcontract for certain things. For us, it's usually like localization and QA, because sometimes having subject matter experts who that's all they do is the way to go. But you have less ability to influence stuff the further away you get from the source, whether you're not talking to the marketing people directly, that they maybe don't have as much insight into your project and the needs. The more spots away you get from the source, the harder it is to ensure quality and alignment. So I do think it's good that they're upfront about subcontracting, right? And it's totally understandable that some people will outsource certain services, but what services is most important to you, because you should make sure that you are vetting that and you are working directly with the people who are providing those services. Sometimes it will be like things like porting is outsourced quite regularly, but even and then you can't verify that that outsource vendor is actually not continuing to outsource themselves. Like this happens a lot in localization where you go to a localization studio and you expect a certain level of quality, but then they're hiring people outside of their own studio and then it just deprecates the quality of the results that you're getting. So there are lots of studios right now that actually offer like white glove publishing where they're work for hire. They provide all the publishing, but they don't take any of the recoup. It's just I'm paying you a set flat amount and you are handling these services that I'm not capable of doing myself. So that is a thing that's happening right now with pretty good success.
Yeah, from my two cents is that at one point I find it a green flag if a publisher is at least honest about what they're good at and what they aren't. Whether I believe this is a red flag also determined is a bit determined by the contract conditions, because if they take a very big rev share and then still outsource the work, then it just feels more like a project manager than a publisher. At least from my perspective, I always believe it's important that you at least ensure. I've mentioned briefly before, like, hey, make sure that you have the IP rights to a port and marketing materials. If it's outsourced to a third party, you should be able to ensure that the IP rights from that third party contractor are transferred to the publisher so that the publisher can transfer it to you based on the contract that you have. So there are some concerns to take into account, but it is manageable.
Okay, sorry. I think I'm gonna go through the next question here. I was just reading some of those comments. Um, I don't know if this is a tricky question, but if desperation forces you to accept a bad deal, what's the least damaging red flag? I can understand that, right? Because like, you know, if you need something and you're not able to find that partner, um, yeah.
It's a very conditional one, because I always also believe that red flags are very dependent on the kind of game you're developing and the situation you're in and the rest of the deal. But I would never settle on transparency. So the audit one is for me always a very big red flag if someone doesn't want to do it. For example, if you have the hey, you don't get any money until recoup, yeah, let's be honest, if it's a decision between going bankrupt now because you don't have funding and having a risk in the future that a recoupment takes too long, of course, I would go for the second option and see what the future will hold. But at the same time, it remains something that you rather negotiate. So even if desperation equals to, well, I don't have that much time anymore until my bank account is empty, at least try to find a legal representative for a very, very urgent review or some quick checks to make sure if you can at least get something out of it and it's really not possible and your studio depends on it. Yeah, then I can't blame anyone actually. And then, yeah, every red flag. Yeah, if you need to choose between stopping your studio and accepting a red flag, that's a very hard decision for me to make, to say like, well, yeah, this is a red flag you can accept and which you can't, because sometimes desperation forces you into that.
Yeah, normally desperation means that you need financing and funding. So publishing is not the only avenue for that. You can also explore investors and VCs. There's other routes other than traditional publishing that may be more applicable to your needs.
Or crowdfunding, maybe. something like
or
that. Yeah.
crowdfunding.
Okay.
All right.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'll jump into this next one. What are the average expected commitments of a small team or solo dev? For example, expected recoup for the publishers, do they expect creative control in some capacity?
What I at least see in contracts is even if you're a small team or a solo dev, there will not be that more creative control compared to normal contracts, to be honest. But you see that there might be a more tighter milestone schedule, which I at least see in practice. I also don't really see a difference in recoup. What I do see is that if you are a solo dev or have a small team, normally your ask for development funding is then lower. So naturally, that could lead to situations where there's no recoup or a smaller one. But I don't see any very obvious standard differences when you are a solo dev or you have a small team compared to bigger ones. What I do see is, of course, the bigger the budget gets, the tighter the contracts will become because there's a bigger risk from the publisher perspective. But I never worked with a publisher or heard about a publisher who said like, yeah, you're a solo dev, so here we have a super strict contract, or now we want to make the creative choices. So, of course, it can be a risk more that if a solo dev gets ill, that things get delayed. So that could be a risk, but I can't really say that I've seen that the contracts were handed vastly differently. Could be some minor changes, but that's about it.
Thank you. I have a question from Anthony here, who I used to work in a AAA as a dev, and my previous job says they'll work with me to publish, localize, and market what I'm working on right now. But they are requiring a monumental number of sales, 1 billion, or they get to own the IP. I'm planning on saying no, but I'm curious if this is normal practice.
This is not normal practice. I would counter it with them going for best efforts to get at least 1 billion in sales and give them very much obligations to reach it if you would ever do this. But I prefer you to say no.
Oh, yeah. Um, does anyone, I don't know if anyone in your wants to come off mute and raise their hand for a question. I think we have like maybe just a couple of minutes left, maybe one last question or two. If anybody has another one.
I have one more quick comment on the transfer IP while we wait.
Yeah.
I advise for a handful of rather big names in the games industry, and some of them, when they have given up their IP to major people who it makes sense because they kind of bring legitimacy and fame. I'm talking like to the scale of first party platforms or companies like Disney, where transferring over your IP brings sort of this prestige that transferring over to just somebody doesn't in the same way. And then they get locked out of creating games in content in universes that they built themselves. Like the creative builders of some of these huge IPs and franchises transfer their IP, and then they never get to make a game in that franchise ever again because the IP license holder just sits on it. I don't know what they're doing with it, but it happens quite regularly. So if it's an IP you care about and you want to keep working in that universe, probably don't give it up.
Thank
All
you.
right.
I actually, can I just ask that last question that came in? Because it's a really interesting one for me. The Nathaniel asked, for an aspiring dev, how much of a complete game should I have before I bring it to a publisher?
Yep, that's a good question. It used to be a lot easier to get financing with just a pitch deck and not a playable demo. But right now, it doesn't need to be a full vertical slice. It can be just a demo, but they need to see same as we're on the contract terms, anyone can say anything, and it's doesn't mean they can deliver on it. Anyone can say anything in sort of a pitch deck, but that doesn't mean that they're able to execute on the promise of quality that they're setting. And we're making games, so the thing that matters most about the games is the product. So we need to actually see some level that gives us a kind of confidence that you can actually deliver what you say you're going to deliver, that it feels good to play, that it looks good. It's really challenging to get a publisher who will sign without some sort of playable. Uh, it doesn't need to be content complete. You don't need to have all the features. It doesn't need to be a pure vertical slice. But in those scenarios where you don't have less of a game or a playable, we usually ask to see something else that helps us feel like we're mitigating risk, like hey, have you launched other games? And we can see that you are a developer who actually can achieve a good quality product. How are they rated? Do you have design docs that show where you're going with this? Are you a team that has shipped games together before? Something else that sort of mitigates that risk calculus in a way that we feel more confident signing a game that doesn't have as much of a playable demo.
Yeah, I just to add to this, at Unite in Barcelona back in November, we had one of our talks at Unite was Cybernetic Walrus, where they presented a game called Roadside Research. I think it's coming out soon in early access, but they actually said that they only did a trailer, dropped it on the store, got like hundreds of thousands of wish lists, and were able to get a publisher there. So like I think there's things like that as well that I guess are less. They happen less often, but it's also possible as long as there's something where the publisher, feels like they have something they latch on to that are like there's promise there. Jeff, do you have one last question, or is there anything?
I think there's one that I think Renee may be actually answering. I'm not entirely sure. Let's see. Oh, it changed on here. Yeah. Go ahead.
I saw the one from Tim, which I was already thinking about, who says, for developers who entirely self-fund their games, it's difficult to think publishers are equally sharing risk. If publishers don't fund development in any way, how can you ensure shared risk and that they're deserving of their 30, 40, 50% or higher share, assuming 90% is already a red flag? If you fully self-develop without funding, I don't really believe a publisher should receive 40 or 50% of a ref share, except, and that's why I always say it depends, if they make huge commitments, huge marketing budgets, a very full-fledged plan where you can say like, hey, they match your investment, then I could still think of a situation where they should. But if it's fully unfunded and you just deliver them a completed game, I more see between 20 and 30% in my practice, depending on the commitments of a publisher, but it really depends what they do. Of course, they're sharing risk in case that their income is also dependent on it, but from a perspective of the negotiations, I just make sure that I'll throw out some clauses which are customary if a publisher invest, but are not that needed if they don't. So from that perspective, it's just take the template they use when they invest and do marketing and yeet out all the clauses which are normally to protect their investment.
Thank you, Renee. I think this is all the time we have for today. I don't know if Alyssa or Renee. Oh, actually, I can just send out your email. I was gonna say, ask if you want to drop it in the chat, but I'll do a follow-up email for all the attendees so that you'll have both Renee and Alyssa's contact along with the resources that Alyssa's created. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for joining for today. I hope this was helpful for you. And yeah, like look forward to the next time we have another Pro Hour where we can, keep on helping you succeed in your businesses and your projects. So yeah, just a reminder that at the end of this, there is a survey. It's anonymous. Please answer if you can. It really helps to give us feedback to ourselves and to the speakers as well. So yeah, I don't know if Jeff, you have any final words, or Alyssa or Renee?
I mean, this is great questions that came in, and yeah, going back to my original comments, if you don't have a contact at Unity and want to reach out to anybody, I'm also available. I can drop my email in the chat, or did you say you were going to send that in an email later, Al?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you should drop in the chat as well.
Sure.
So yeah, if you have any questions about anything Unity related, Jeff would be a really good contact for you. Renee, any last words from you?
No, I'm happy that everyone stayed through the end. So thank you so much for your attention. Like I said before in chat, if you still have any questions concerning your personal situation, feel free to reach out. You can do so through email, which was in the presentation, through LinkedIn or any other socials. You can find me, and whether it's Blue Sky or Instagram or whatsoever, under the punny name Ace Attorney with an O. But if you have any questions which you really wanted to ask but didn't feel comfortable enough because it's pretty personal or pretty sensitive, you can just ask them. There are no costs involved, so we just take 30 minutes to go through your personal situation, and that's supplementary because of our collaboration here with Unity to provide this knowledge.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.